Hello everybody, Marcus Godwin here with the Shoom Vremeny Noise of Time blog from St. Petersburg, Russia. Here we are, behind me is a statue of Catherine the Great, and behind that is Nevsky Prospect, the main artery of St. Petersburg. There are so many things to talk about and what's going on in Russia at the moment, and of course the whole COVID virus thing and the whole how it morphed into race riots very mysteriously in the United States and now Western Europe too. For the moment, no race riots here, and pray God there never will be. With the reasons for that we'll go into another day. What I want to talk about today is this question: is Russia losing its youth to Western soft propaganda, and if so, is it a problem? Unfortunately, I think the answer to that question is 100% yes, and yes, it is a problem. How to say? First of all, I should mention that since over the last 2.5 years, when I came back here after a pause, I got invited to just go to some faculties to meet students and talk to them, ask them questions, allow them to ask me questions, and so on and so forth. Specifically, I went quite often to the theatrical faculty, and also to a faculty where people are studying international relations, etc., etc., etc. What I found, and some of the professors who invited me had already warned me about this, is that the young people, these young students, basically believe that everything in Russia is bad and that everything in the West is wonderful, shiny, fair and just. Yes, I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about in the 1980s, Soviet times, or in the 1990s when living standards were much lower here. I'm talking about now, today. Now, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but this was really the general opinion. Of course, we can say that, actors, musicians, painters, poets, artists, for some reason or other, are not always very switched on politically, although they all think they are. And I'm not just talking about young people here, I'm talking about a lot. So, there's a kind of tradition, certainly here and in some other countries, that, students and actors and so on and so forth become, involved in some sort of extremist politics or anti-establishment. And of course, anti-establishment in Russia means being anti the current Russian government. However, why are they still worshipping the West, when really and truly, even before the whole coronavirus and now the fabricated race riots, and I choose my word carefully, the West really didn't have very much to offer, or doesn't have very much to offer Russian people anymore. Unless, of course, those Russian people are genuinely interested in British or English or French, or German, Italian, Spanish culture. That's something completely different. There are always such people, and that's totally justified. In order to solve this problem, I think we have to talk about Russian television. Now, I started living here in 2003, and I can tell you that Russian television was quite amazing. You could see anything. I mean, they even had, quite regularly soft porn in the evenings, on Russian TV. They had a whole load of really terribly made and extraordinarily violent cop shows, gangster shows, programs about wives betraying husbands, husbands betraying wives, domestic violence, etc., etc. There were political documentaries, historical and artistic documentaries that were pretty good. There were also political talk shows, though they became much more popular around the time of the reunification of Crimea. But the main content, even of the main mainstream Russian channels in the evening, used to be Western, and it used to be primarily Hollywood films. They would find the way to show Hollywood films on these mainstream channels literally about 2 months after they were released in the United States. I saw also late at night on Russian TV many art house films from Europe. All of them dubbed, unfortunately. Russians aren't big on subtitles. So many art house films from Europe. As you may know, I lived most of the 90s in France. I even saw some obscure French films that I'd never seen or heard of in France, ever. So, around the time of 2011-2012, the Russian government seems to have woken up to the fact that their people, especially young people, are being seduced and affected by all this Western content. And for sure, a lot of Hollywood films definitely have subliminal propaganda influences. Now, of course, we understand that there are subliminal references and imagery, symbolism of Satanism, etc., etc., etc. So the Russian government decided, let's get rid of all this Western content from our TV and have our people watching Russian content. Okay, in some ways it's not such a bad idea. The trouble is, as very often happens in Russia, so-called reforms have a habit of throwing out the baby with the dirty bathwater. There was no let's get rid of the propaganda films and keep the good ones, or keep the European. The whole lot went, just completely went. And then, unfortunately, for a country with outstanding actors, outstanding theatres, outstanding filmmakers in the past and present, they were somehow unable to fill up the airwaves with content which was as seductive or as professionally made as this Western content. The result, within a few years, young people stopped watching Russian TV at all, completely. I would say it's no exaggeration to say that in this country, anyone 30 years of age or younger simply does not watch Russian television anymore. It happened a few years ago that I had to spend nearly 1.5 years outside Russia, and when I came back, just looking around the streets, looking at the young people walking the streets, I noticed a huge difference. They were all copying Western hipster-style culture. Tattoos were rampant, and I mean really extreme ones. Like a lot of young people had tattooed halfway around their necks, their faces. All the guys had the long beards, that became so fashionable about 3 or 4 years ago. It was about this time I started to get invited to these faculties and understood that all these young people believe everything the West tells them about the world and systematically disbelieves everything about that they ever hear about Russia. So we get back to this situation as it used to be in the last years of the Soviet Union and in the 90s, where the West glittered and had this high standard of living, and also had uncorrupt police officers and so on and so forth, and you couldn't just pay bribes for everything. This is a very complicated issue. Even then, the West was not clean in this way at all, but it somehow looked clean, and now it really doesn't. So the exasperation of some of these professors who were also understanding that this was very bad for Russia, actually, this was really not helpful at all, was that the Russian government seems completely oblivious. The planners of the television schedules, etc., they don't seem to be aware of this at all. Finally, last year, I think in the late summer or autumn, a survey was published that proved that 40% of young people in Russia believe there is no future for them here, and they all want to emigrate. Finally, this survey got talked about. It made some publicity, and it got talked about on mainstream news. It was talked about on the mainstream political talk shows, which are actually much more democratic than what's left of our political talk shows in Western countries. But nobody proposed any solutions. It's very difficult to say what to do, but I would propose, first and foremost, that Russia starts to use its innate talent, which is here, in producing TV programs, in producing films. There are some kind of gatekeepers preventing really creative, professional content getting on Russian TV. The result of this is pretty serious, because young people believe, for example, that the Russian intervention in Syria is to prop up a vicious dictator who's constantly gassing his own people. This is the Western propaganda. They start watching, great programs like New Sherlock and so on and so forth, and the next thing you know, they believe every political propaganda that comes out of Hillary Clinton or George Soros, etc., etc., etc. This is definitely undermining Russia's position in the world. it's also turning young people against the Russian Orthodox Church. There are, of course, a huge amount of people who are in the Russian Orthodox Church, and that's one of the things that keeps their mind a little bit more on the straight and narrow, because the Russian Orthodox Church is the number one target, actually, of this Western propaganda. But the situation is really quite grave. They managed to turn round the opinions of the population after the reunification of Crimea, and when people saw what's going on in Ukraine, etc., how the West was funding this push there to have an enemy government on Russia's borders now that the West can use. A lot of people over the age of 30 woke up at this time, but the new generation, that's already 6 years ago. So people who are now entering university or entered university last year were kind of 13, 14 at that time, even younger, 12 and so on and so forth. So, my advice to Russian planners, to the government in general, is to use the talent which is here, because there really is a huge amount of talent in all areas of art and so on here, to create content which actually makes young people want to watch it. Therefore, they will not fall victim to this subliminal brainwashing that comes from the majority of especially Hollywood, but also other programs. There are these organizations here, and always have been, kind of youth movements, like the United Russia Party has its own youth movement and so on. And this, of course, has what some people call propaganda. It certainly trains young people to be kind of patriotic, but not everyone can go there. I approve of these organizations, but for example, I personally, when I was young, did not want to join those kind of organizations, even for causes I believed in. I just didn't feel comfortable in them. And it's the people who don't want to be in these kind of organizations that Russia is losing, and quite seriously. So that's enough for today. This theme will be continued, and others too. See you next time. And please, if you've enjoyed this and want to see more, consider making a contribution if you can. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.